everyone. My name's Donna. I'm so sorry about the technical problems. It seems to be a problem my end with Microsoft Teams isn't playing ball on my computer. So I just wanted to have a chat today really about some of the things and common things I'm seeing in clinic at the moment. I'm a physiotherapist. I've been qualified for 30 years this year, and I run private practices in Bristol. And I have to say that since the COVID pandemic, my physio practice is generally a sports physiotherapy practice. But during the COVID pandemic, we're seeing more and more pain syndromes coming through the door, really largely from the way that we've changed our lives and the way we've changed our working environments. So I'm pretty keen to be able to discuss today what we're seeing mainly in clinic, and offering just generalized tips and good bits of advice on how to look after our well-being. So what I want to cover today in slide number 2, we're going to be just talking about our workstation setups and why it's so important to add a bit of credence and taking some time to make sure that we provide our own good workplace setup. Often when we're in a workplace, we have health and safety representatives doing that for us. But essentially, if we're at home, we tend to sort of just get on with it. And I think a lot of people I'm seeing haven't really spent the time to look at it from a health and safety perspective. So I'm going to run through some workstation setup basics, and I'm going to talk about some of the common problems that I'm seeing and encountering. A few things that you can do to improve. And at the end of this session, I really want to talk about the importance of movement and getting out and about, and some stress relieving techniques as well. For any of you that want to, normally I'm on video, but unfortunately I'm not today. So fortunately I've got a few pictures to go through, but I'm going to try and get us all doing a few physical stretches if you're up for it, and then we'll finish with a little Q&A. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Why is it important to, so hopefully on slide 3 now.
Yeah, we are.
Great. So why is good posture and setup important? So essentially what I'm seeing a lot of primarily is people coming in with the usual complaint of, oh, my neck is absolutely killing me. I've got tightness across my shoulders. That pain goes up into the back of my skull. We're seeing a lot more people coming in with shoulder pain, and often this is disturbing their sleep at night. I've seen a few people with such terrible shoulder pain that they've got pain radiating all the way down their arm, and that may be associated with pins and needles and numbness as well. So that's one scenario. We've also seen an uptake of tennis elbow type syndrome, where you're getting pain either on the inside or the outside of the elbow. So that's tennis elbow or golfer's elbow. And situations with trigger fingers and carpal tunnel. I've seen more trigger fingers in this last year than I've seen in my entire 30-year career. Obviously, it goes without saying that back pain is a sort of a high incident rate anyway. Around about 80% of us at any one time are likely to get mechanical lower back pain, or what we describe as a non-specific lower back pain. But again, we're seeing an uptake of people that have never suffered with back pain before now coming in because they are having to adapt themselves into workstations that they're not familiar with. And also not forgetting straightforward stress. We're seeing a lot of stress headaches, a lot of eye strain, a lot of people that are just feeling anxious and not feeling on top of their game. So we know that working from home is really challenging. We're much less active. I don't know if any of you have been wearing a Fitbit, but often it's those incidental little walks that we do, the little walks that we do to the photocopier, or whether it's to get some water, whether we go out for lunch at lunch times, or whether we actually have a little walk or a cycle to work. We're just not putting in the steps anymore that we normally do. I don't know about you, but it's 5 paces to get to my kettle and back to my screen. So when I'm working from home, it's pretty dire how many steps I'm doing. So the primary driver to making sure that we look after ourselves in the day in a working environment is to prevent these conditions that we've just described above. So let's go straight to screen 4 now, to slide 4. And just want to talk you through the first picture that you see on the screen there. So it's really important to make sure that your laptop is directly in front of you. Now, I know everything I'm saying sounds like it's the obvious game. Everything I'm saying is pretty obvious, but you'll be surprised how many people do not do this. So currently, if we were able to have my video on, for whatever reason, we can't today, but you'd see me sitting at my kitchen table, and I've currently got my laptop square in front of me on a laptop stand. So I'm able to literally reach my hand forward and touch my screen. So if all of you can just now reach your hand forward and touch your screen, if you can see your screen and you can touch it, then it's the right distance. If you're having to do anything at all to reach forward or to lean to touch your screen, the screen is too far away from you. So that's sort of number one. The second thing is I like to use a tape measure from my eye to the top of my screen. And my eye line should be at the top of my screen. So in effect, if we look at picture number 2, we should be looking down off the horizon of our screen. This now allows our eyes to remain relaxed, so we're not looking up at the screen, which requires far more energy, and we can get far more fatigue from the eye muscles when we're looking up. And also, it may mean that we lift our chin to look up, which means that we're sitting with our neck in full extension. So it's important that our eyes are looking at the top of the screen. When we're looking at our seating position, the idea is that we should be supported. So again, at my kitchen table right now, I've got my normal kitchen chair, but I've got a little device on the back of my chair, a lumbar support, which just enables me to sit back in my chair, which is a hardback chair, and have a little bit of cushioning. Also, it's important that our hips are slightly higher than our knees. And you can see in picture number 2, you can see the angle is just ever so fractionally higher. Our feet should be planted firmly on the floor so that we have a good stable base of support. Going back to the shoulder, our shoulders should be at the side of our bodies, on our elbows bent 90 degrees. Now, what I tend to see is a lot of people, when I used to, pre-COVID, go into workplaces and have a look at how people are sitting. More often than not, the arm that uses the mouse is reaching forward or is extended on the desk. So it's on a stretched position. Why is that important not to do that? Well, if you think about the nerves coming out of your neck, they're like long cords, long pieces of string running right down to your fingers. And effectively, if you're sitting with your arm out straight or extended, then you are putting those nerves on stretch. And also, it takes quite a lot of energy to sit with your arm in an extended position, where if your arm is by your side in what we call neutral, you're able to let those shoulder girdle muscles release a little bit, and that will give you less strain through those muscles. So the final picture is just reiterating the idea that the eyes are at the horizontal, at the top of the screen, and you can see that she's got her laptop on a riser so that she's able to get that position. Now, you can use all sorts of that, and we'll come into that later. So as I say, it's pretty obvious when we're talking about it, that's how we should sit, but not everyone does that. So if we move on to slide number 5, Sue. These are just some of the common things that you'll see, and on the surface of it doesn't look that bad. But if we look at picture 1, even though she perhaps feels very, very comfortable, that over a period of a couple of hours sitting like that, and if you're doing that day in and day out, although there may be some short-term comfort and you think, well, I feel fine, this will become a problem for this lady. So if we just have a look, you can see her screen isn't central in front of her. Her keyboard is to the left, her screen is to the right. For her to use her mouse with her chair in that position, she's going to have to reach right across to use her mouse. And she's going to have to strain her neck to get involved with the screen there. You can see that she's crossing her legs, which really ideally when you're in your workstation, you want to make sure that your feet are planted firmly on the floor and that you're sitting back in your chair to give your back some support. Moving on to the picture number 2, again, somebody working off a laptop, so easily done. Not so much at the moment because the temperature has dropped, but it is nice to get outside if you can. But again, we forget when we're just changing our workstation and just maybe working on the hoof in different places around the home. Again, if you're like me, you're having to sort of move from room to room because you've got kids in one room and dog in the other, then often you'll just put yourself into any position just to get that little piece of work done. But this lady here is really twisted. If you were trying to imagine what her spine is doing inside there, legs are facing one way, her pelvis will be rotated, and her spine is adapted with a curve, which is slightly concave to her right. So that would be long-term quite a problem. And when I talk about long-term, I don't necessarily mean weeks and months. I'm talking about hours, really. So if you're sitting like this for a few hours, you might say, well, I'm comfortable when I sit like that. I never have any pain. But what we see is that the person that likes to go for their recreational run on the weekend is now starting to have a few problems. Often it'll be tightness from their hip flexors, not stretching enough, or sitting awkwardly that makes their body adapt to these postures through the day. And it's not during the sitting that they get the problem. It's when they then get up to run. Or we'll see people that have spent a lot of time crossing their legs, and then when they go to run, they'll start getting iliotibial band syndrome or Achilles problems or calf tightness. The final picture is something that we sometimes don't consider, and that's lighting. We tend to plonk ourselves in wherever we can, but if you've got glare hitting your screen and the glare then hits into the eyes, that can really increase eye strain, which can in turn increase headaches, but it can also have a huge effect on what we call the visual ocular motor reflex. And that in turn can have a direct impact on the muscles within the neck. So it's really important to make sure that your lighting is good, that you've got natural light where possible. And if you have got artificial light, it's not bouncing off your screen. So the screen position, if we move on to slide 6, has to be, just to summarize, has to be centralized, eyes at the top of the horizon, arm's length away, and essentially you should be able to use risers or laptop stands should you need it. Now, equipment-wise, to be able to achieve these things, I've just put in a little bit of a sort of mishmash of equipment. I'm currently using a headset, and to use a headset just takes the pressure off, especially now when we're at home juggling mobile phones and home phones, as well as having to use our laptops. I think to take the stress out of it, using a headset, they're fairly reasonably priced these days and very easy to use. I use a headset all the time now if I'm talking to anybody through the computer and on Zoom calls, because again, it just takes out that background noise. And if you have got children and so on in the area, I think a lot of people are straining when they've got just using their normal audio. So I would encourage people to use a headset. It also stops you holding the phone in your shoulder and adding extra strain in the neck. The laptop stand I'm using currently is the one, so the laptop stands that you see there, I'm using the one on the right. I use a company called Posturite, which are very good and often do packages for laptop stands. And then you can have an external mouse and an external keyboard. Not all mice are the same. If you suffer with anything to do with carpal tunnel or trigger fingers or what we call the Quervin syndrome, which is a horrible pain in the thumb, It's often because we're in one fixed position with our hand, and it's quite good to have a variety of mice, so that if you are on the computer all day and every day, you can just change the position of your hand by using a different mouse setup. On that note, talking about posture in general, there isn't any 100% ideal posture. We've refuted that in the research, that actually it's not about finding a posture and fixing in it. It's about being able to move regularly from one posture to another. So even though I'm talking about the ideal posture, it still wouldn't be great for you to have one ideal posture and stay in it for hours on end. It's about adapting and moving regularly in and out of these different postures. So sometimes I'll say to people, vary your workstation, vary the equipment that you use. I noticed on Amazon recently that you can buy these little sort of stands for your desktop that you can literally rise up very easily. I think they're £135 currently, and you can stand at your desk then and just very easily go from a seated position to a standing position. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, Sue, just looking at some other seating options. So again, just reiterating what I've just said, it's not about having the perfect chair.
Sorry.
It's about...
I think I was on devices. I'm on devices. Have I missed one? Or
you now need to move down to other gadgets.
That's it. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. So on the other gadgets, I'm just looking at, obviously we all would love to have the perfect office chair. But if you haven't, you can use these lumbar supports that, again, I think they're selling those in Home Bargains for £5 or something ridiculous. You can get a rolled up towel just as easily to put into the back. Seat wedges are great. So in all of my clinics right now, in all of the chairs, we have seat wedges. And I say to the therapists, you use them periodically through the day. So you can put them in, you can put them out. Just changes the position of their back on a regular basis. Swiss balls are good. We often use Swiss balls for seating. And being able to move as you're sitting is great. It keeps you mobile. You can do figure of 8 movements with your pelvis. It keeps your back going. Also helps to just, get those abdominal muscles going a little bit as well. So I love Swiss balls for sitting at desks. Other little things that you can use are, I'm just going up to the top right hand of that slide. This is a foot rest. And I mentioned earlier on that we should be able to plant our feet firmly on the floor. Now, if you're a little bit shorter or you struggle to get your feet on the floor, then we do advise that you use a footrest. And again, it's quite nice to be able to have a footrest that you just put in and out periodically. It doesn't always have to be there, but just to give you that good centre of base of support. The bottom right hand of that slide is a document holder. And again, you see people, going back to what we looked at on slide number 5 with that first picture where the lady was writing notes and reading from notes. Often that can be a problem because then we're having to strain our neck and our head to look down at our notes. So a document holder can be very helpful just to have at the side of your screen, so you don't have to keep turning your head down in a downward direction to look at your notes. Okay, let's move on to the next screen. So what we're seeing often in clinic is this poor basic setup. People will say, well, I haven't got a chair, I haven't got an external keyboard and mouse. I work alone, I can't afford to buy all these gizmos and gadgets that you're talking about. So below, if we go to the next slide, Sue, to slide number 10, just being able to adapt your chair with whatever you've got. So cushions, towels, anything at all to increase the height of a chair or to give you that back support behind you. Moving down to number 11, you can see in this picture, we've adapted the laptop height just by using a biscuit tin. You just use a pile of books. It doesn't have to be expensive or flashy. If you don't have a keyboard and mouse as an external keyboard and mouse, and you're having to use a trackpad, then there's nothing you can do about that. But I will say that on Amazon, they do very good deals for a keyboard and mouse package, and you can get them as cheap as £10 these days. So it doesn't have to be fancy. But if you can't do it, you just have to adapt by taking more breaks so that you are actually reducing the strain in your hands and your wrists. In terms of foot supports, again, you don't have to have anything fancy. You can just use a rolled up towel. Currently at my kitchen table, I've got my feet just propped up on the underside of the table. There's a little strut there, and that's where I'm resting my feet because I am a shorty. So let's move on now from the workstation, and let's now move on to movement. So movement is essential, and although, again, I say, I'm so surprised that this information, and we all know it, we all understand it, it's all out there. We know we need to move more, but we just don't. When I start talking to people in clinic and saying, right, okay, how many hours do you sleep? They say, well, probably about 7 to 8 hours. And then how many hours are you at your desk for? They say 7 hours or so. That's 14 hours out of the day where you're essentially off your feet. And if you add into that eating, maybe watching a bit of Netflix in the evening or drama, actually those hours can add up. So when you actually look at it, you might only be on your feet for a small portion, less than a third of the day, sometimes even less than that. And even then, if we're walking, we need to make sure that we're doing something that raises our heart rate a little bit, because it's our responsibility to be moving. So although it seems to be the obvious advice, it's sometimes really difficult. I've got 2 or 3 patients in at the moment that really worry me because they are so stressed out with work. One works for themselves, so is doing ridiculous hours, like 14-hour days at a desk. The other one works for Ofsted and schools, so you can imagine how stressful that's been trying to get everything going for schools. And the amount of sitting at a desk and the amount of pain this woman is in constantly. And although I keep saying you need to move more, she's just, I just cannot give it any credence or any time. And the problem with that is that her priority is her job. But unfortunately, I really do believe that she's going to come out of this COVID situation with, a long-term chronic pain syndrome. And that's miserable when it doesn't really need to happen. So making that time for yourself, allocating time to be able to move. So often I'll say to people, all it takes is 10 to 15 minutes a day of just you time. And then outside of that 10 to 15 minutes, I like to talk about, in a working situation, micro pauses and mini breaks. A micro pause is seconds to just almost release the pressure gauge. And a micro pause might be literally 5 minutes worth. We'll talk about that in a bit more depth in a minute. Now, as I've said, if you really are in a terrible situation and you are crammed in a spare bedroom somewhere and you really haven't got very much space, then I would suggest that you put even more credence to taking time for these micro pauses and mini breaks. The worse the position that you're in, the more important it is to keep yourself moving. And movement really does work. I cannot tell you how many times people say, well, I didn't do the exercises that you gave me for the first couple of weeks. I didn't think they would help much. I'm just too busy. But, I've had a week off, and do you know what? I've really started to notice since I've been doing them, it really does help. So, really try it. It really does work. So why is it that these postures create such a problem? So, number one, if you're sitting, one thing that I haven't mentioned on this slide, and by the way, Sue, I've moved down to slide number 15 now. Are you with me there?
I am. Yeah, we are.
Good.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Fantastic. So the one thing I want to just talk about in brief is, why is it important that we move? Well, number one, that what isn't on this slide is if we're sitting all day, is that we're not maximizing our potential to take a good deep breath. Often we're sitting, we're slightly sort of slumped. Our diaphragm doesn't get the opportunity to expand, which means that we're getting air right into the bases of our lungs. That's really important. To be able to get oxygen right to the bases of our lungs is important. But when we're sitting, often we tend to shallow breathe more. We only tend to take air in to the top half of our lungs, which means that the ribs on the top half of our body are working harder to be able to get the same amount of air and oxygen into our body that we need to function. So being able to just stand up, even if it's just for 10 seconds, to be able to open up through our rib cage, take a good deep breath in, and maybe even a diaphragmatic breath. What I mean by a diaphragmatic breath, I'll come to later when we do some breathing exercises. But being able to get the oxygen going right to the bases of our lungs is a really important thing to do. That, in turn, when we get good oxygen in, helps generally the flow of oxygen in our blood. And blood flow is really important to keep our muscles full of nutrition and full of the nutrients that it needs to function properly. When we hold on to postures and we stay in one particular posture, often the muscle is switched on, but because we're not moving, the blood flow through that muscle isn't quite as proficient. So we're not getting the nutrients that we need. And that leads to a buildup of what we call contractile proteins, a lack of nutrition to the cells, and then the muscle fatigues, and then at a lower level, then it will start to feel strain and pain. So it's about blood flow, nutrients, and oxygen. And the only way you can really get that going is through movement. Okay? So static postures lead to poorly perfused oxygenated muscles, lower blood flow through the muscles, which increases the fatigue and then increases the liability for strain and pain. Number 16. So what we need to do is think about what we're doing. Really take time to consider what our day really looks like and to think about what we're doing at work. So taking time out to think about our workstation and taking time out to look for those opportunities for more mini breaks. So if we take telephone calls, being able to maybe move around on that telephone call. So as I said, I use a headset, so I may transfer my headset to my mobile phone and just walk outside with the phone or walk around the house and, just being able to take those calls in standing. If there is documents that you need to read through, do you need to sit and read them at the desk? Can you go outside into the garden? And as I say, this time last year when I did this same lecture, it was a beautiful spring day, and encouraging people to go outside was a little bit easier. But if you can go outside or just change your environment, then that would be absolutely fantastic. Having some thinking time, just taking time out to just switch off, maybe just close your eyes for 2 minutes just to take the strain away off your eyes. Think about your breathing and just reset. If you think about your whole sort of working environment a bit like a glass of water, that all day as each hour ticks by, the water glass is just filling up and drip feeding into that glass. And what you're doing by taking a micropause is not allowing the glass to overflow. What you're doing is you're emptying the glass out, resetting yourself a little bit so that you can start again and you've just taken away some of the strain. So it's good to just have a little moment, maybe after this lecture, just talk about ways that you might be able to improve and change your working environment. The slide 17 is really just to reiterate, this isn't a new problem. We've always had communications and reading books. We've even in the olden days, it's important that we moved and changed our tasks. It's just that now, obviously, everything is becoming increasingly more at home and on the computer, and Zoom calls, we're not even getting to meet and walk to meetings together anymore. Moving on, I'm just going to go now into more specific conditions that I'm seeing. And this is where, if any of you have any problems and I strike a chord with any of you, with anything that I just sort of touch on briefly, just make a little note and then we can come to it in the Q&A session at the end. So first of all, back discomfort. I think it's really important to keep moving through your back and doing very specific exercises. So as we say, make sure that you're not leaning forward too much and that you're not sitting slouched in a chair, and that you've got a good support of cushions should you need it. In terms of back health, again, as I say, if you just sit bolt upright all day, that is still going to cause a problem. It's about moving. Your back is a very mechanical, strong, moving bit of kit and machinery. It's got synovial fluid in between all the joints, and that's a bit like your natural WD-40. So essentially, you being able to move is you keeping that WD-40 sort of moving, your synovial fluid moving in the joints, which keeps the spine very, very lubricated. So it's really important that you move regularly. Often the back conditions that we see can sometimes be like a sciatica type pain, which will give you pain right down the back of the leg, and that's often when the nerves are irritated in the back. So what we often see is this, and again, I'm not just talking about home working now, it's the people driving. I had a phone call, the very phone call over the weekend, where somebody said it was their first time that they'd been in the car for a while for a long journey. They did a 4-hour trip there and back to see a family member, and now they've got rip-roaring sciatica. And I sort of talked them through the seating position in the car, and essentially when they had their foot on the pedals, their right leg, their leg on the accelerator, was in a full extended position. So again, if you imagine that the nerves coming out of the lumbar spine, the lower back area, like pieces of cord, essentially they'd spent 4 hours with that nerve almost on stretch. So after a 4-hour stint, that nerve was irritated, and the only way that it could sort of alert that person that there's a problem is by firing off those pain signals. And also there may have been some inflammation around the nerve, and that can give out the chemical reaction of pain as well. So this sciatica type pain is also because if we're sitting on your bottom, you can get tight in your bottom muscles. And one of the bottom muscles, the deepest of the bottom muscles, is a muscle called piriformis. And piriformis can be very, very tight around your bottom area. But the sciatic nerve runs underneath piriformis. So if you're not stretching your butt regularly, then that can cause pressure on that sciatic nerve. So it might not necessarily be a back problem. A lot of people say, oh, I think I've got a disc problem, I've got this rip-roaring sciatica. And often it's just that they've got a really tight piriformis in their bum and they need to stretch it, and that just relieves the pressure off the sciatic nerve. Also sitting, again, slumped or slouched. I always try to say to people, if you just put your hands now under your bottom and you start to feel for the bones of your butt. So when we say we're sitting on the bones of our arses, that's what we're feeling for. Now, if you just slightly push your weight forward, so you're taking some of the weight through the bones of your bottom, but taking some of the weight through the back of the thighs as well, that distributes the weight slightly differently off the spine and in towards the back of the thighs. And if you roll back onto the bones of your bottom again, you can feel that that will push you into what we call a flex position through the spine. So that can be a problem as well. So it's just being able to work out where you're distributing the weight through your pelvis and shifting that weight regularly. Moving on now to slide 19, Sue. So we're going on to the neck. You with me? Hello?
Yes, I am.
Yep,
Sorry,
there.
the delay.
Oh, yes.
I'm on mute, so I have to unmute to say yes, I'm
Oh,
here.
sorry. Okay, right, great. So neck discomfort, yeah. So just checking your position. You're all experts now because we've talked about screen position. Is it too far away? Is it too low or high? Could it possibly be that you've got a light shining on that screen, which is bouncing into your eyes, and that can create this problem with the visual oculomotor reflex? Or is it that you're just not taking enough suitable breaks? Again, as we discussed earlier, are you reaching across to your mouth? Are you not taking regular breaks to be able to sort of offload that pressure in the neck and the shoulder region? Okay, moving now down to slide 20. If you are using a laptop again or just a normal keyboard, how often do we take time out to just stretch our fingers and stretch our wrists and our hands? Very rarely. And yet those fine dexterous movements that we're using require quite a lot of energy from a lot of wrist and finger tendons. We've got a lot of tendons running through our wrists and our fingers for that dexterous movement. Those tendons, we never really give them any thought at all. So later on in the exercise session, we're going to go through just being able to stretch your fingers and your wrists. Slide number 21. So if you do suffer with headaches particularly, or neck strains, it's important now that you look at other ways of perhaps minimising the risk of glare on the screen. So obviously the obvious thing is to move the screen to some natural light, maybe side on to natural light rather than it being behind you. But if that isn't possible, you can buy these anti-glare screens that you can put over your laptop screen, either as a sort of casing around the outside edge, as you can see in the top right of that slide, or by just having a screen cover directly over the screen. There are other issues with your glasses. If you wear spectacles, you can actually have anti-glare screens and adaptations directly onto the lenses, which can help with glare. Other things I want to just mention, though, are things like temperature and ventilation. I know now we're all working from home, and especially at the moment with our variable temperatures, is getting the temperature right at home is really important. If you live with anyone like my husband, who absolutely insists on never, ever, 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 ever having the heating on during the day, that often you'll find yourself being really cold, and that can sometimes give rise to a little bit more tension in the body, because we're not as warm as perhaps we might be if we had the heating system on in our office. So making sure that you are warm enough, either dressing appropriately, but also consequently having enough ventilation. Again, you know, that if I was left to my own devices, the house would have the heating on all day, and I'd probably end up feeling quite sort of groggy by the end of it, because I'm not probably getting the ventilation I need and the oxygen I need. So it is important to make sure those things are looked after as well in terms of ventilation and oxygenation. Moving on now, so we talked about breaks. Oops, I've just moved off my screen, sorry. It's important to get the breaks we need to work on just lowering our stress levels. I know that Daniel was telling me that you've had the opportunity to have some wellbeing days where they've talked about mental health and some stress relieving strategies. Now more than ever, we need this. We are working ourselves into the ground. It's so important to lower our stress and lower the cortisol that builds up in our system when we sort of are hitting deadlines or working from home, and we feel that we're doing more than we've ever done at the moment, that our cortisol level rises, and cortisol really does interrupt our quality of sleep. So I'm finding now people are coming into clinic and we start asking them about their sleep pattern. They'll say, I wake up almost every 4 hours. And that 4-hour waking cycle is often as a consequence of having too much cortisol in our body, that stress hormone. And that stress hormone is just running amok really on our bodies, because it's the whole fight flight response. We're sort of running on these sort of adrenaline driven deadlines. So it's important to lower the chemical reaction to the stress so that we can not have that fight flight response, and then we'll be able to get into much deeper sleep. Most of the people I see that are in pain, when we start talking about sleep hygiene, is poor. Sleep hygiene basically means not taking your phone to bed, making sure that you have a good wind down routine, so not drinking tea and coffee, just before you're about to go to bed. Trying as much as possible to, maybe go to bed and read, or not be looking at social media or answering emails to the minute you try to drop off. Writing lists before you go to bed of all the things you need to do, and then forgetting about it, rather than churning over things in your mind of what you've got to do the next day. Write a list, forget about it, and then when you wake up in the morning, you tack it thereon. Sleep quality is linked hand in hand with chronic pain. So if there's any of you out there that have constant chronic pain, you've got to look at your sleep hygiene and sleep quality. The research is, unequivocal that it has an effect on pain responses. So how do we get that good quality sleep is by also paying attention to how much stress we've got during the day. So movement, again, lowers that cortisol levels in our body. Breathing also correctly also helps to control our stress responses. I love things like a little bit of yoga, a little bit of Tai Chi. There's so many free apps and YouTube clips that you can just click on, 5-minute yoga that's for free. You can do it anywhere, just in your kitchen, a couple of yoga moves, a couple of deep breathing exercises, and jobs are good. So moving on to slide 23, people say to me, well, how much time should we have off? How much should we take off? Well, according to government guidelines and health and safety, we should all be taking a lunch break away from our desk for at least 30 minutes every day. And again, just thinking of a few patients I've got of mine, even that is a struggle for them. So really important to allocate that time. Outside of your lunch break, the idea is that we should be taking a break of some description every 20 minutes. Now, what I mean by that could be a micropause, which is 10 seconds to just close your eyes, stand up, do a stretch, do some breathing, just for 10 seconds. So one of the above. It could be just a mini break where you just go off, get yourself a glass of water, or take a phone call for 5 minutes that's away from your workstation. And yeah, if you can try and intersperse those micro pauses and mini breaks throughout the day, then you're doing a really good job to be able to do that every 20 minutes, 10 seconds every 20 minutes. If you're in a compromised situation, the recommendations are you do that more often. And if you're actually conducting your business or your work solely through a mobile device, then again, you really need to be able to take more breaks than even just a good DSE setup. Working on mobile phones, God knows where the next generation of kids are going to end up, because we're using that so often now. So I think it's really important that we sort of take some heedance of what we're using as a device as well. Okay, so on that note, I can't see you all, which is a bit frustrating, but I just would like you to all just stand up for 1 minute if you can, if you're able to, and just take a nice big deep breath in. Not sure if anyone's with me. I'm doing this completely blind, so I could be talking literally into the ether and everyone's staring at the screen thinking I've gone mad. But if you can go with this, then go with it. But just standing up and just finding out where the position of your shoulders are. So I'd like you to just lift your shoulders up towards your ears and then just let go. So they literally just drop. I want you to now put one hand on your stomach, and when you take a deep breath in, I want you to see if you can get your stomach to push out into your hand. And just see if you can count in for 3, out for 3. Good. Just think about now putting your hands at the bottom of your rib cage. Just literally cupping the bottom edges of your ribs. And now take a deep breath in and see if you can feel your ribs pushing into your hands. A nice big maximum intake of breath. Good. Okay, that is a micro pause. Just going into a sitting position now, so just doing some neck exercises, looking at the screen in front of you. Just have a go at just pushing your chin inward into your hand at the back of your head so that you're making a lot of double chins. So I want you to try and push your chin inward like you're trying to make a double chin. If you want, put your hands behind your crown at the back of your head and see if you can feel that pressure at the back of the head. Okay, that's good. Excellent. This time, see if you can rotate your head around to the left and hold that stretch. Okay, turn your head around to the other side and stretch again. Okay, this time I want you to take your ear to your shoulder. So head to the center and ear to shoulder, but this time take the hand on that side and just pull your head gently over to one side. Hold that stretch. Perfect. And do the same on the other side, taking your head over and stretch. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. This time, let's just think about where your shoulder blades are sitting. So I want you to squeeze your shoulder blades back behind you. So I want you to not just pull your elbows back. What people tend to do is they just push their elbows back. See if you can keep your hands in front of you on the desk, but only pull the shoulder blades back, like you're trying to trap 50 pounds between your shoulder blades. See if you can hold that. And release. The shoulder blade position is imperative and important because some of the biggest muscles in our body are in our spine at the back. And because we're sitting with our arms forward and our shoulder blades forward, those muscles can get very weak. So what I often see is that people will then go into the garden, they'll have been working all day at a computer, then they'll go into the garden and start pulling out weeds. And they'll say, I think I've sprained my shoulder, my rotator cuff tendons. And that's because they should have been using these big, powerful back muscles. But because they've been sitting at a desk or driving a car all week, those muscles have weakened off. So when they're in the garden, they're constantly overworking the smaller muscles around the shoulder. And they're taking all the strain until eventually they'll start to become painful or inflamed. So very important that we put some effort into our back. On that note, we're now going to do some rotation work around our thoracic spine. So you'll see picture number 2, somebody rotating in their chair, rotating all the way around to the left, getting a nice big stretch through the mid-back area, taking a big deep breath in while you're doing that, and rotating and twisting. Sometimes I quite like to have a golf club by the desk that you can put around the back of your shoulders, so that can give you an extra bit of stretch. Now reaching up hands overhead, really reach. Again, I have people coming in and I'll get them to put their hands up to the ceiling. And I'll say to them, how often do you think that you put your hands over your head and reach up to the ceiling? And they'll say, I don't know. I don't really do that. If you lose the ability to get your arms above your head and really stretch, those muscles will become tight and eventually you'll have a problem. So stretching those arms over your head and then adding that to a little side bend as well is a lovely, lovely stretch, which will stretch right the way down to the lower back. One of your muscles is called latissimus dorsi. It's in your shoulder and in the top of the hip bone. So stretching the arm overhead and reaching down to one side stretches your latissimus dorsi and can have an effect on all sorts of problems, as in back pain and shoulder pain. Okay, standing up, we can practice some side flexions and extensions. Have a go at just side bending. And practicing just leaning back, so hands on your hips or on your bottom and just leaning back into extension. When I lived in New Zealand, there was a campaign to say, extend before you bend. So if anyone was doing any bending activities, so such as gardening or playing hockey, for example, the idea was to keep extending the back periodically if you're in prolonged periods of flexion. Moving on to slide 27 now, some ways of stretching through your hamstrings. And remember I talked about that pesky piriformis muscle? So one of those stretches there, the second slide, second picture, where she's put her leg up into what we call a tailor's knee position, can help to stretch out the back of the hip and that piriformis. So if you do tend to suffer with sciatica, that's a good stretch to do. Stretching the hip flexors is really important if you like to go for the the odd recreational run. If we get tight in our hip flexors, that can have a detrimental effect on the way that our stride length is, the way that we run, the way that our glutes, our muscles in our bottom fire, and that can be a huge problem. Okay, moving on to slide 28. Some tips to stretch out through the forearms and the hands. This is a really nice mini micropause stretch. This one takes literally seconds to do it. At the desk, you can do it while you're talking to somebody, while you're on a Zoom call, just being able to reach out in front of you, drop the hand and give that a good stretch through the forearm. And moving on, fingers, if you suffer with trigger finger or the Quervin syndrome, where you get really painful in your thumb, my husband suffers from that. These are some lovely stretches. I also quite like having hair bands or elastic bands that you can practice because, again, we're scrolling, aren't we, through iPads and scrolling through trackpads on our phone. Often those tendons can get quite strained, so keeping the tendons strong as well as stretch is important. Okay, now, Sue, I don't know if you could just jump ahead 2 slides to slide 31, which is the one with the spiky balls on. Hopefully you all can see that. There's a slide with basically a lady using what we call a spiky ball. These are quite helpful. Again, you can buy these online, spiky balls or Pilates balls. They're only a couple of quid. But if you are suffering with problems with knots in your muscles or feeling tension spots, the spiky ball, you can just lean against a wall or lie flat or lean against a door and just be able to push into those muscles. It's a bit like what we call trigger point massage, and you can get a little bit of movement around that knot in the muscle and just help to increase the blood flow. There's also a great one if you do suffer with pain in the butt or pain down the leg, is to stand against the wall, but with the spiky ball just in the bottom area, and that can sometimes offload quite a lot of the pressure down in the lower leg. Okay, so jumping up now to slide 30, which is our summary. So let's just go through what we've talked about. So we talked about make sure you take time out to assess your environment, assess everything, the workstation, the ventilation, the lighting, everything. Then set up a plan for yourself. How am I going to move more? What can I do to move more? How can I take my calls somewhere else? Don't forget to breathe. Breathing helps lower your cortisol. Make sure you hydrate well and do anything else that you can to relieve the stress. All of that will help you to have a better quality sleep, which will in turn reduce any pain and chronic pain cycles that you might have. Okay, that's me done. Now, open to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Donna. Thank you. That was a really good session. We've had lots of great comments. We've had a few questions. I don't know if we've just gone over time now. Donna, I hope you wouldn't mind just staying on and maybe just answering a few of the questions, and then maybe we could take away any remaining ones and come back to people with an answer. But there was one question was around using two screens. Do you have any advice if you use two screens?
Yeah, the absolute rule for that is to make sure that the join of the two screens is smack in the centre of where your nose is, so that you're able to just at an eye glance be able to move with your eyes from one screen to another. Again, the same principles apply. You should be able to reach and touch both screens if you're operating off both screens. If it's a scenario where your laptop is powering one screen and you rarely look at the laptop, it's mainly one screen, then that might be a different scenario. But actually those desk risers that you can get that I talked about on Amazon, they even do it for two screens now. So, you know, you can lift up the desk height really easily. But yeah, the rule of thumb, dead centre of your nose.
Excellent. Thank you. Is it okay to have a chair with no armrests?
Yeah, no, armrest is quite controversial. So I've been on quite a few what we call DSE courses. I personally, I love an armrest because I think that particularly for heavy set people, that your arm, if I was to chop your arm off as a dead weight and weigh it, it's a couple of stone in weight. So often having an armrest means you can just rest your forearm nicely on that, and your wrists and hands should be, you know, almost directly over the desk. The keyboard should be around about 10 centimeters away from the desk so that you can rest your wrists just on the edge of the desk. So sometimes I think that armrests are good to be able to just support the weight of the arm. However, I've been on lots of courses where occasionally they say actually it's better not to have an armrest, because sometimes an armrest can be set too high and encourage people to have their sort of shoulder blade lifted too high, and that creates a lot of strain through the upper neck. So I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. If you are going to have armrests, it's quite good to be able to have armrests that you can put in and out. So, or lower right down. So sometimes you're using them, sometimes you're not. And that you're varying the position so that you're not ever in one solid static posture. So hopefully that answers the question. There is no strict rule of thumb with that.
That's great. Thank you. I think the last question we'll cover was just someone has tendonitis in my mouse arm, so they exercise lots. Can I carry on exercising, or will that hinder the recovery?
It depends. It depends. So if I'm going to presume it might be a tennis elbow type forearm tendon problem. Effectively, it's usually over gripping that can be a problem. So if you're talking about exercising and you're talking about going to a gym and lifting kettlebells and weights, that at the moment might aggravate your problem and hinder your recovery. If you're talking about general cardio or HIIT programs, that shouldn't. General exercise would be really good for the arm. All I would say, if you are thinking about lifting weights, you need to do what we call load management. So we want to lower the load so that the tendon does get exercise. It's important we still do exercise and weighted exercises, but the rule of thumb is that the pain should be no more than a 2 out of 10, and that should not increase, if you like. It should stay. If it's a 2 out of 10 and it doesn't get worse afterwards, then that's okay as a good rule of thumb. But if it increases to a 3-4, then that's no good.
Excellent. Thank you. I hope that's covered. Mary, that was a question from Mary Carter. So thanks, Mary. If there's any further, great, thanks. Okay. Mary says thanks for that. So I think I'd just like to say thanks everyone for joining today. We have a session next week, which is a sing-along, and if you can join us for that, that will be our 10th session, and that is with John Prescott, a singer called John Prescott, and not the John Prescott from the Labour Party, or Two Jags as he was affectionately known. It's with John Prescott, the singer, next Wednesday, 2 till 3 o'clock. If you want to join in and do some jazz, soul, swing singing, then please do join us. I just want to say thanks very much, Donna. It's been a really, even with the IT issues, it was great. It was you've got really clear tone, and it was a great It was a great session. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. I've never done one blind completely before, so that was something.
No, I mean the IT was against us today, but you rose to the occasion. So thank you very much. It was really good, and thanks Sue for helping today as well last minute. And I realised and I learned something that piriformis isn't one of the three musketeers. So that was on that note. We'll end the session. But thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, take care. Bye.